The DPRK has cancelled a high-level meeting with its southern neighbor, and the much-touted talks between Kim Jong Un and Donald Trump are now hanging in the balance. What's behind this about-turn? And immigration controversy has raised its head once more in the U.S., this time over the forced deportation of hundreds of Cambodians. Some are saying they were all convicted criminals. So what's all the fuss about? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK, abruptly cancelled high-level talks with the Republic of Korea, scheduled for Wednesday, over what it called provocative military disturbances from the annual joint Air Force drills with the U.S., codenamed Max Thunder, which began last Friday. The DPRK also issued a strong warning to the U.S., saying that if the U.S. pushed them into a corner on nuclear disarmament, they would pull the plug on the high-profile summit between the DPRK leader Kim Jong Un and U.S. President Donald Trump, scheduled for June the 12th in Singapore. So what's behind this sudden shift? And will this U-turn on the peninsula's path to peace be a brief setback or the beginning of more major roadblocks ahead? Joining me are Professor Robert Kelly of Political Science at Pusan National University in the ROK, and DARYL G. KIMBALL, Executive Director of the Arms Control Association in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Now, after months of warming ties and significant diplomatic efforts on both sides, the DPRK's official Korean Central News Agency called the Max Thunder drills a flagrant challenge to the declaration signed in April by the two Koreas, and an intentional military provocation running counter to the positive political development on the Korean Peninsula. Professor Kelly, why did the DPRK cancel Wednesday's talks with the ROK?
Yeah, I think it probably was a mix of both what has been coming from the White House in the last couple of weeks and the drill itself. I don't think the drill is actually that dangerous, but it doesn't help to fly B-52s around North Korea, right? They really only serve an offensive purpose. I think the Air Force probably could have held this off. The timing was pretty poor. But I think the real reason is the sort of triumphalist rhetoric about North Korea coming to the negotiating table at Singapore, right? The Americans, the Trump administration, has increasingly been spinning this as something akin to a capitulation, and that, of course, is not how the North Koreans see it. The North Koreans see this as a meeting of two equals, as sort of the American president meeting their leader one-on-one as peers. This is not a supplication, not a capitulation, and I think the North Koreans put this out there to make sure that the framing of this event followed that choice, right? That it's a meeting of equals.
Mr. Kimball, tell us a bit more about these Max Thunder drills. Are these exercises unfolding as usual as they have been since 2009, or have there been greater military muscles being flexed this time?
Well, this year's operation was scheduled weeks ago. The North Koreans were aware of it, but we have to remember that North Korea gets most of its information about the nature of these U.S. ROK drills from the news media. And there was a Yonhap news report not too long ago that said that there would be B-52 bombers and F-22 Raptor fighter bombers involved in this exercise. And North Korea has said quite clearly, beginning with Kim Jong Un's speech on January 1 of this year, that they object to nuclear war exercises. So from the North Korean perspective, the involvement of B-52s is a nuclear war exercise, and they very clearly are saying that that kind of exercise is contrary to the spirit and the letter of the Panmunjom Declaration. So I agree with Robert Kelly's analysis. I think this also indicates that the North Koreans are going to make the nature of the military exercise a key feature of the upcoming talks with President Donald Trump and the United States about an action-for-action process of denuclearization and achieving a peace regime and reducing tensions on the Korean Peninsula.
Professor Kelly, what were the high-level talks between the two Koreas supposed to cover anyway, and what are the immediate consequences of these talks not taking place now?
Yeah, so the Panmunjom Declaration a couple of weeks ago got the ball rolling, but as was widely noted in the punditry and the discussion of it, it was pretty thin on detail. It was only a few pages long, and a lot of it stated stuff that we'd heard back in 2007, the last time there was an inter-Korean summit. And so going forward, the South Korean, North Korean meetings will mostly be sort of working level stuff, right, in which they begin to actually hammer out the details of what the Panmunjom Declaration will be in operation, right? So, like, you know, will there be a reopening of the Kaesong Industrial Zone? Will there be family reunions and things like that? And this stuff is complicated. This is sort of getting the lawyers together in a room and figuring these things out. There's supposed to be another summit in the fall. Moon Jae-in is supposed to go to Pyongyang, but in the interim, it'll probably be more working level and diplomatic kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Now that these summits, this high-level meeting between the two Koreas are not taking place, how is that going to affect the expected summit between President Trump and Kim, Mr. Kimball?
Well, I don't think in the big picture it's going to affect it too much, because it appears as though the preparations that are going on between the United States and North Korea for the Trump-Kim summit on June 12-13 in Singapore will continue. And I think the remarks from the White House in response to the North Korean cancellation, and also Vice Minister Kim Kye-gwan's comments about John Bolton's approach to denuclearization were important. The White House said essentially that, you know, we will continue to move forward. This does not disrupt our plans. We have not heard anything from North Korea indicating that they are canceling or delaying preparations for the Trump-Kim summit. But I think one thing is also very clear from the recent statements from Pyongyang, which is that they are trying to make it clear, and Robert Kelly just said this a few minutes ago, that they want an action-for-action phased process for denuclearization and the normalization of relations and political and economic changes in the relationship, rather than the kind of, as John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, put it, a Libya-style denuclearization in which North Korea would get rid of all of its very substantial nuclear infrastructure, nuclear materials, nuclear weapons, and then only much later get so-called rewards in return. From the North Korean perspective, that's absolutely unacceptable, and it's also a reminder that Muammar Gadhafi, the former leader of Libya, after he allowed his uranium enrichment equipment to be removed, he was deposed and he was killed. So that is unacceptable to the North, and so they're reminding Washington that this needs to be a real negotiation on the basis of equality and exchange of ideas in the talks, not on TV shows.
Yeah. Well, President Trump's new Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said the U.S. will continue preparations for the Trump-Kim summit, keeping in mind this action of the North. And on Wednesday, Trump told reporters we'll see what happens, and that he will insist on the DPRK denuclearization as a condition of the talks. So are we witnessing a diplomatic standoff or just customary dramatic rhetoric between the two sides? Is there anything that the U.S. should be doing to try to de-escalate the temporary tensions, at least, Professor Kelly?
Well, I suppose it would help if John Bolton would stop going on television so much, right? I mean, this has been one of the Trump administration's problems, not just on this issue, but on many, many issues, right? Is that the president doesn't really set a clear course, in part because he doesn't do the research on complicated issues like healthcare or China or North Korea. And then his subordinates kind of, you know, run wild and they go on TV and they say all kinds of different things, right? And it would help a lot if the Trump administration would sort of decide what is America's negotiating position on North Korea, what exactly are we prepared to give away in exchange for what? You know, we still don't really know. We're 3 weeks out from what could be the biggest deal in, you know, in Northeast Asian history in the last 25 years, certainly the biggest thing that will happen in the Trump administration's first term. Right? And nobody really knows quite what we're getting into. And that gives people like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and others a lot of room to freelance. And that's just got to stop, or it's going to lead to sort of outbursts like this from KCNA. So, you know, you don't just need to muzzle John Bolton or this person or that person. The president needs to set a clear course and be much more specific about what it is we're actually aiming for now that we know that complete disarmament is impossible. What specifically are we looking for, and what are we ready to give away? And that would help a lot. That would help everybody, actually, a lot if we knew what the guidelines were.
Well, the DPRK has made some concessions already, including suspending their ICBM and nuclear testing, announcing the closure of the Pyongyang nuclear testing site, and releasing some detained U.S. citizens last Wednesday. So, Mr. Kimball, what kind of concessions has the U.S. given? Do you see them poised to do anything in return for the goodwill gesture that has already been seen from the DPRK side?
Well, North Korea is certainly trying to build up some diplomatic capital with these moves, the restraint on the ballistic missile and nuclear testing and the detainees. I mean, the United States has also made some important moves. Donald Trump signaled quite clearly that he would support the negotiation of a permanent peace treaty to end the Korean War. That's very important for North Korea. They see that as a sign that Donald Trump is willing to end the so-called U.S. hostile policy towards North Korea. Donald Trump has agreed to this summit, which is, of course, a very important move for North Korea. It puts Kim Jong Un on the world stage. He's negotiating as an equal with the leader of the world's largest and most powerful country. So what we need to keep in mind, however, is that one summit is not going to solve a decades-long conflict. It's not going to lead to the immediately to clarity about how and whether North Korea will fully denuclearize. So I think what we have to keep in mind is that the summit can provide an outline, a framework for the course that the two leaders want to chart. I think we're going to see a Panmunjom declaration, something similar to the Panmunjom declaration coming out of the Trump-Kim summit. But then the other important thing to be looking for is whether the two sides agree to a structured framework for regular talks, probably between the foreign ministers, maybe on a monthly basis or every 2 months, with working level meetings in between to work out the complex details of denuclearization. And I would say the other thing that Donald Trump needs to try to deliver from the summit is to solidify the North Korean promise not to conduct further ICBM tests and nuclear tests. The closure of the North Korean test site is something that can be reversed, and I think he needs to try to get North Korea to sign and ratify the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. The North Korean ambassador in CD signaled they might do that just the other day in a speech in Geneva.
Right. Well, I want to ask very briefly about one point in the declaration that was released in Panmunjom. Professor Kelly, it said that both sides will, they will strive that before the end of this year there will be a trilateral meeting between the ROK, North Korea, and the United States, or a a four-way meeting between the United States, China, ROK, and DPRK. Professor Kelly, where are we in terms of who's going to really sit down and talk about the details of either denuclearization or the new or the peace mechanism on the peninsula? Briefly, please.
Sure. The peace mechanism, that's got to be the two Koreas, right? I mean, ultimately, this is like an inter-Korean issue, and they should really be working on this between the two of them. When it comes to denuclearization, the Americans and the Chinese are going to want to have a lot of say in that, particularly the Americans. The Americans are going to want the IAEA or somebody involved so that we can actually really get in there and learn the specifics. There are a lot of questions about what North Korea has and where the stuff is and the rest of it. All that's going to, the Americans just aren't going to trust anybody else. The larger role for the Americans and the Chinese, though, is important, right? I mean, both sides have interest in the peninsula, especially China because of the border, and the Chinese are going to make sure that any final deal roughly accords with what their interests are, right? So China's sort of the silent partner in the back, right, kind of waiting to see what comes of it, but trying not to rock the boat because the Americans and the North Koreans are talking, which China has wanted for many years.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Robert Kelly from Pusan National University in the ROK, and DARYL Kimball, Executive Director of the Arms Control Association in Washington, D.C. You have been watching The Point with Amelia Sheehan. After a short break, we'll be taking a look at the latest controversial immigration policy in the U.S. to hit the headlines, the deportation of possibly hundreds of legal residents who are not yet citizens. Stay with us. 43 Cambodians were deported by the U.S. to Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, at the start of April, the largest batch yet, under a controversial deal that enables America to expel legal residents with criminal records and who have not become U.S. citizens. The group is the latest to be sent to Cambodia under a 2002 bilateral agreement between the U.S. and Cambodia. The program is controversial because it breaks up families, and in some cases, the returnees have never lived in Cambodia, having been the children of refugees who fled to camps in Thailand to escape the Khmer Rouge that ruled Cambodia from 1975 to 1979. Prime Minister of Cambodia Hun Sen said the agreement should be reviewed on humanitarian grounds because it splits up families settled in the U.S. More than 500 other Cambodians have already been repatriated since 2002. But over the past year, U.S. authorities have ramped up raids under President Donald Trump, whose administration has taken a hardline stance on expelling criminals and undocumented migrants. As of December last year, there were over 1,900 Cambodian nationals with final orders of removal residing in the U.S. So why is this program proving so controversial, and is anything likely to change as a result of both public pressure and pressure from the Cambodian government? I'm joined by Kalvin Heng, who was deported from the U.S. back in 2004 and who is now marketing manager of the Phnom Penh Press, a local English newspaper in Cambodia. He founded a self-help group called One Love Cambodia. And also I'm joined in the studio by current affairs commentator EINAR TANGEN. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Now, it is expected that some 200 Cambodian-Americans are likely to be deported this year, but all have committed crimes in the U.S. and none are U.S. citizens. So, Mr. Heng, what do you see as the biggest problem with this policy? Isn't President Donald Trump simply doing what he promised all along he would do before he became president?
I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear your question, but what I caught was that what I see wrong with this policy is that, you know, most of the U.S. American immigration policy just put it into a one-hat-fit-all type of law, which it's not it, because sometimes they want to take people out from the U.S. that are illegal, but then people that went to the U.S. as political refugees get caught up in this net as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were deported, as I said, from the U.S. back to Cambodia in 2004, and you now own a local newspaper in Cambodia. But you also started off as a self-help group called One Love Cambodia, which lobbies the Cambodian government to protest the American deportation system and also supports new arrivals in Cambodia. So please describe what actually happened to you. For instance, how much notice did you get of your deportation before you had to leave?
I didn't get any notice at all. Basically, I just got a phone call telling me to go check in, because once you're released from your prison sentence or your jail sentence and you got your final order of removal, what they do is they put you on supervision, ICE supervision stay, and you can continue and live your life in the U.S., going to work, raising your family as normal. But then once you get that phone call, like I had that phone call, I went to go check in as any abiding person would do, and they just, you know, cuffed me and told me that I'm going to be going to Cambodia. My heart just dropped, and I didn't know what to say. So I was in detention for about another 2 more months, and they put me on a flight with about 15 other Cambodians and shot us out here to Cambodia.
What did you leave behind in the United States?
My whole family, my parents, my siblings, my whole life, as a matter of fact. You know, I grew up in the U.S., grew up as an American basically, and you know, went to college, started working a full-time job and just turning my life around, and you know, basically trying to grow up and become a responsible adult, and I didn't get that chance to do that.
What was it like when you first arrived back in Cambodia then? How did you make a living and how did you turn things around slowly?
You know, being out here 23 years old, not knowing what to do, just totally in shock, traumatized from the separation of your family and your life over there, and not knowing like what could happen or what's going to happen to my future. So it's you know, basically totally in shock. I was just looking for other people that are just like me, and you know, just thinking about how we can make a living out here, how we can contribute to the community, how can we basically turn a bad situation somewhat into a good situation. And a lot of it was just a lot of support from my family back in the U.S. Back then, Cambodia didn't have anything. There was not really any good communication channels to go through, so there were these internet spots, and I would spend all my time in these internet spots just talking to my mom and my family, and you know, listening to words of encouragement of using my skills that I learned in the U.S. to apply it here in Cambodia and, you know, make a difference out here. And
right. Now that
really motivated me to.
Right. Now that we're seeing this trend picking up, more people being sent under the Trump administration, what kind of support do you think needs to get out there? And do you think there will be a change of policy in your eyes?
You know, there's not many services out here. We started as an informal support group within the community ourselves, and that's what's been working so far. As far as the policy changes in the Trump's administration, I don't even have any words for that. By the way it's going, you know, you can't even see the future where that's going.
Okay, let me get back to my guest here in the studio. EINAR, you come from the United States. As we've heard, many of the deportees are ex-convicts who are deported for crimes they committed as minors, and numerous cases involve trivial, non-violent misdemeanors considered felonies under U.S. law. And this has led many to criticize Washington for what it seems to be a double punishment against its legal residents who have already served prison sentences in the United States. What is your view of the legal position of such policy?
Well, actually, the policy was not started by Donald Trump. It was something that was negotiated under President Clinton in '96. It started taking effect in 2002 when there was an accord signed with Cambodia. Last year, Cambodia actually did revoke it and said we're not going to go along with it. But after their government people were denied visas, they gave in and reinstated it. The issue of criminal conviction is one part of this. In theory, once you have been punished, you've paid your debt to society, and the point is that you go on. In this particular case, because they are immigrants, they are illegals in the United States, they do not have status there, they can be removed under the law. Now, the real question here is about the morality. You know, the United States is a nation of immigrants. I mean, Donald Trump's own grandfather was involved in, reportedly, in some nefarious activities. He removed, after making quite a bit of much money, to Germany, where he was actually rejected. That was his home country, and he was sent back to the United States with his wife at that time. So, I mean, this is not a nation that came with people who you know, had all of the good things going for them. In the case of the Cambodians, the issue here is that their parents, many of their parents, could have made them American citizens and avoided this, but they were poor, they were not educated, so in many cases illiterate. They did not know how to bring their children into this, and in some cases, they didn't, and this has cost the children a lot. In some ways, it's like DACA, the Dreamers, except in this particular case, there have been convictions for crimes, and this is what is really haunting them at this point.
Yeah. So let's zoom out a little bit in the time scale, and where are we, if we were talking about periods of stronger nativism, Are we in that period of time at this moment, and is the trend going to intensify because we're talking about building the wall and sending back these deportees? EINAR.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that Donald Trump campaigned on. This is something he believes. He was just quoted yesterday as calling people from Mexican gangs animals. He's used these types of things. The famous speech where he said, you know, all of these guys are rapists and drug dealers. He tends to make generalizations. It plays very, very well with his core group. But the fact is, this is part of what is America. You know, this, the irony that a nation of immigrants becomes nativistic has been going on. It kind of hits the United States every 50 or 60 years. The last time we had this was during Senator Joseph McCarthy's witch hunt brigade, where he was, you know, calling anybody who wasn't, quote, American in his eyes, perhaps a communist. So this thing continues to go on. Unfortunately, it's the ugly side of democracy. Hopefully it will pass soon.
Mr. Heng, very briefly, if you can say one thing or give one piece of advice to those people who are facing similar fate than you did in 2004, what would you say?
Don't lose hope. I mean, just keep on looking forward. These policies may change or may not change, but our life keep moving forward, and our loved ones are always around. So, you know, keep hope alive.
Okay, thank you very much to my two guests, Kalvin Heng, the advertising manager of a local English newspaper in Cambodia, and EINAR TANGEN, our current affairs commentator. And here is my point. Except for the Native Americans, everybody in America was once an outsider, but they came to this land believing that their lives would be better tomorrow. These people, with their strengths and weaknesses, made America the country it is today, and the diversity, vitality, and tolerance that define the American culture is where its soft power really lies. It is probably the right of the administration to use legal means to purify the country, but along with it, there will be a tarnishing of the emotional status of that place in the hearts of those who grew up there and those who look up to it from afar. That is it for this edition of The Point with me, Lu Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.